They showed up at my front door with clipboards and fake smiles. 3 of them. HOA board members. At the front, Penelope Bradford, 50-something, bleached blonde, those oversized sunglasses she never took off, and a voice that could curdle milk on a cold day. She was the self-declared queen of the Seacliff Shores HOA. Behind her stood 2 goons who never introduced themselves, just nodded like bobbleheads. "Isaiah," she said, her lips pursed so tight I thought she was sucking on a lemon. "We've decided the beach behind your house should be communal access." I blinked. "You've decided?" "Yes. We voted at the last board meeting. The beach is a community asset and the rest of the neighborhood deserves access." I stared at her. "Penelope, that stretch of beach is on my deed. Bought it fair and square when I moved in 5 years ago." She gave a dismissive laugh. "It's sand, Isaiah. It doesn't belong to anyone." "It does when it's literally written into the property line," I said. "You can't vote your way onto my land." She stepped closer. "If you don't comply, we'll be forced to issue a non-compliance citation. It's in the bylaws." I leaned against the doorframe. "Show me the bylaw that says the HOA can steal private property." She didn't respond, just sniffed and turned on her heel. That should have been the end of it. But the next morning, I woke up to tire tracks along the side of my house. Someone had driven an ATV through the gap between my fence and the dunes to reach the beach. Beer cans scattered along the sand. A fire pit dug right in the middle of my property. They'd gone around me. I checked my security cameras and sure enough, it was Penelope. She'd brought her adult son, some guy with a vape pen and a backwards cap, and a whole group of HOA lackeys down to enjoy the beach. I wasn't even mad. I was impressed by the level of entitlement. So I did what any sane man would do. I installed a 12-foot steel gate between my fence and the dunes. Motion sensor lights. Camera with live feed. Concrete posts sunk deep. I even painted it a cheerful blue just to make a point. 2 days later, Penelope came back. No clipboard this time. "Just rage. You had no right to install this," she screeched, jabbing a finger at the gate like it had personally insulted her. "I had every right," I said, stepping outside. "Want to see the survey, or the deed? Or the zoning documents? You're obstructing community enjoyment." "It's not a community beach, Penelope. It's mine. Yours is 2 blocks down, public access, plenty of parking." Her face turned red. "This is retaliation. You're being hostile." "No," I said. "Installing a gate on my property is called enforcing boundaries, literally." Then she said it. "We'll see about that. You'll be hearing from our legal team." I laughed. "Your legal team is Harold, the dentist with a printer." She stormed off. That night, someone spray-painted "Community Hog" on the gate. I checked the cameras again. It was her. The paint was still drying on the gate when I filed the police report. The officer, Ramirez, looked over the footage without saying much. Just nodded, took notes, and asked for a copy of the video. I handed over the flash drive without a word. He didn't laugh, didn't crack a smile, just said, "Looks like you've got a case for vandalism. We'll follow up." I asked him if I should expect more trouble. He met my eyes. "Depends on how far they're willing to go." By the next afternoon, I had my answer. A certified letter arrived in an envelope so thick it could have stopped a bullet. Inside, 32 pages of HOA legalese and a formal cease and desist demand. According to the letter, I was disrupting neighborhood harmony, obstructing community pathways, and violating easement expectations. I read it twice. There was no easement. The gate was on my land, the access point was never public, and there was no mention of any community right-of-way in my title, survey, or title insurance documents. I called my lawyer, Andrea Cho, a former real estate prosecutor who now handled zoning disputes. She didn't even finish reading it before she laughed. "This is a bluff. They're hoping you don't know your rights." "Can they sue?" I asked. "Anyone can sue," she said, "but they'd have to prove their claim. And unless they've got a time machine and a forged plat map, they've got nothing." I asked her to prepare a response anyway, something sharp enough to set the tone. She sent a 5-page rebuttal. citing state property law, referencing my deed, and ending with a formal warning that further trespassing would trigger civil and criminal charges. We overnighted it to the HOA's legal committee. Then I waited for a week. Nothing happened. The gate stood untouched. The cameras rolled. I figured maybe the warning had worked. Maybe Penelope had finally realized she'd bitten off more than she could chew. Then came the backhoe. It rolled down the street on a Wednesday morning, escorted by a man in an orange vest and 2 HOA board members waving laminated documents like they were royal decrees. I was on a work call when I heard it. Looked out my office window and saw the machine's bucket arm rising over the sand like a mechanical scorpion. They were going to tear down my gate. I bolted outside. "Stop that machine," I shouted. The operator hesitated, looked toward Penelope. She raised her voice. "He's in violation of the Community Right of Access Clause. We're restoring entry." I turned to the guy in the vest. "You touch that gate and you'll be charged with destruction of private property. I've already filed a police report." He looked nervous. "Ma'am." "I thought this was approved." "It's not," I said. "This is my land. The HOA has no jurisdiction here, none." He killed the engine. Penelope stepped forward. "You're obstructing an enforcement action." "You're orchestrating a felony," I said. "And everything you just did was caught on 6 different cameras." I pointed to the roof, the fence, the dune pole. "You want to explain to the judge how you hired heavy equipment to bulldoze private property?" She didn't respond. Just turned to her board members and muttered something about miscommunication. They left. The backhoe reversed down the street. I took pictures of every angle, time-stamped everything, and sent it to Andrea. That evening, I got a call from Officer Ramirez. "Got a tip from the rental company," he said. "They were told this was a city-approved demolition. That's false." "Do I have a case?" He paused. "You've got more than that. What they did qualifies as attempted destruction of property, and if the HOA president signed that rental agreement under false pretenses, that's fraud." The next day, Penelope was served with a subpoena that should have slowed her down. It didn't. By Friday, I found a flyer in my mailbox, professionally printed, glossy, and stapled shut. It was titled, "Reclaiming Our Beach, a Community Awakening." Inside was a full-page picture of the gate with the words "Private Greed" written across it in bold red font. Underneath, a paragraph about elitism, denial of shared spaces, and a neighbor who thinks he's above the rest of us. They were trying to turn the neighborhood against me. Didn't matter that what I'd done was legal. Didn't matter that I'd never stopped anyone from using the public beach 2 blocks over. Penelope had shifted tactics from legal threats to social pressure, but she underestimated something critical. I wasn't new to public shaming. Before I moved to Seacliff Shores, I'd spent 12 years in city government. My job, oversight on zoning boards and HOA compliance committees across the county. I'd seen every flavor of petty tyranny, every manipulation of CC and Articus, and every trick in the book. I knew how to handle this. That weekend, I hosted a beach law and BBQ event at my place, sent out invites to the entire neighborhood, rented a food truck, set up tables in the front yard, grilled ribs, played music, and handed out copies of the property plat with highlighted sections showing the legal boundaries of my land. I gave a short talk, 5 minutes, max, about property rights, the difference between a community easement and a false claim, and what had actually happened. Then I showed the security footage, the spray paint, the ATV, the backhoe. People stood silent for a moment, then someone muttered, "She lied to us." Another neighbor, a retired teacher named Judy, nodded. "She told us you were trying to wall off the entire shoreline." I raised an eyebrow. "You've all seen the public beach, right? Still open, still accessible." I just blocked access to my yard. By the end of the evening, I had 23 signatures on a petition demanding a recall vote for the HOA board. On Monday morning, Andrea filed a civil complaint for attempted property damage, defamation, and harassment on my behalf. 2 days later, the police executed a search warrant for the HOA office. Penelope's office. They found forged documents, fake easement paperwork, an altered copy of the neighborhood plat with my lot line tampered. Even a draft letter pretending to be from the city zoning department never mailed, but printed on what looked like official letterhead. Ramirez called me again. "She's in serious trouble," he said. "Forgery, impersonation of a public official, conspiracy to commit fraud." This isn't just a civil case anymore. I asked him what would happen next. She'll be arraigned. Then the DA decides how far to push it, but from what we've found, she's looking at real charges. I looked out at the gate, still standing, still locked, untouched since the last incident. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was the neighborhood finally seeing through her. For the first time since I moved here, people were waving when they walked past, nodding, asking if I needed help with the fence. One neighbor brought me a tray of cookies. Another offered to install extra security lights. The tide had shifted. Not just legally, but socially, and Penelope, she hadn't been seen since the police raid. The Tuesday after the police search, I got a call from a woman named Lillian Cortez. She introduced herself as an investigator from the County District Attorney's Office, White Collar Crime Division. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about the Seacliff Shores HOA. Specifically, the documents we recovered from their administration building." I asked if she needed me to come downtown. "No need," she said. "We're sending a team to your residence. You're not under investigation, Mr. Price. But your property is central to this case." An hour later, 2 unmarked sedans pulled into my driveway. Lillian stepped out in a gray blazer, clipboard in hand, followed by a forensic tech and another man who introduced himself only as Agent Keene Federal Liaison, apparently. That got my attention. Lillian got straight to the point. Among the documents seized were communications between the HOA board and a private developer, Riverside Asset Group. Familiar with them? I shook my head. Never heard of them. They've been quietly acquiring parcels all along the coast, mostly targeting communities with weak oversight and aggressive HOAs. There's evidence your HOA president was negotiating backdoor deals to sell off common areas, including access points they didn't legally control. Keene added, "They plan to create a faux easement through your property to inflate beach access value. That gate of yours." It disrupted the timeline. I felt a pit settle in my stomach. So this was never about beach access for the neighborhood. "No," Lillian said. "It was about pushing you into a legal corner, forcing you to concede use rights, and then leveraging that for a sale clause. One that would have given them a high-traffic corridor straight through your lot. Would have tanked my property value," I said, "and handed them beachfront development rights." "Exactly," Keene said. "It's fraud. And if we can prove they forged municipal approvals, it becomes wire fraud and conspiracy at the federal level." They asked to access my security system archives. I granted full access, uploaded all footage to their encrypted server, and signed a witness affidavit. Before they left, Lillian turned to me. "You've done more than block a gate. You may have just exposed a multi-property scheme." That night, I sat on the porch with a whiskey and watched the sun crawl down the sky. It should have felt like vindication, but now it was bigger. They hadn't just tried to steamroll me, they'd tried to sell my future out from under me. I needed to know how far this had gone. The next morning, I attended the HOA's special session meeting. It was held in the community center gym, with folding chairs arranged facing the stage. The air was thick with tension, neighbors whispering in clumps, casting glances at the empty board table. Only 2 board members showed up. Not Penelope, not her cronies. Just the treasurer, Glenn, and the secretary, Marla, both looking like they hadn't slept. I stood at the back, arms folded. When the meeting started, Glenn took the mic. "We're suspending all HOA board activity pending a full audit. The president and several officers are under criminal investigation. We encourage anyone with questions to direct them to the district attorney's office." Gasps echoed across the room. Then Judy, the retired teacher who'd signed the recall petition, stood up. Was this about the beach gate, or was there something more? Marla's hands trembled as she adjusted the mic. We didn't know about the developer, they kept that private. Told us we were enforcing community guidelines. And you didn't check, someone snapped from the crowd. They controlled what we saw, she said. The real plat maps were locked in the office, we only saw edited versions. I stepped forward. Did Penelope ever mention Riverside Asset Group by name? Glenn looked down. She said there was a strategic opportunity to increase community equity, that's all. I looked around the room. They targeted my property because it was the only one with direct beach access. They needed it to complete the sale, Marla nodded slowly. That's why she wouldn't drop it, even after the cease and desist. The room erupted in murmurs again. After the meeting, I caught up with Marla outside. She lit a cigarette with shaking hands. She told us you were trying to turn it into a private club, she said. Said you were going to charge people to cross the sand, that you'd already filed paperwork to rezone the lot. I shook my head. None of that ever happened. She looked at me. I believe you now. Later that week, a subpoenaed email chain was leaked to the local paper. It detailed how Penelope had been negotiating with Riverside for over a year, offering to facilitate community compliance, in exchange for a consulting fee and a future position on their Coastal Development Advisory Board. She'd even sent mock-ups of public corridor signage that would run through my backyard, complete with bike racks and trash bins. The fallout was instant. The city council held a public hearing. Residents from all over the county attended. I was invited to speak as the affected homeowner. I kept it simple. I didn't install that gate to block neighbors, I said. I installed it to protect my home, and what we've learned since proves this was never about community. It was about deception, profit, and erasing property rights through manipulation. The crowd erupted in applause. Councilwoman Nia Patel took the floor next and announced a full moratorium on all HOA-backed development proposals pending legal review. This case, she said, shows the danger of unchecked authority in private associations. By then, Penelope had been arrested. She was charged with multiple counts, filing false instruments, attempting to defraud a property owner, and impersonating a municipal official. The fake zoning letter alone carried a felony count. Her adult son was also charged with vandalism and aiding in the trespass. The Riverside developers tried to distance themselves, claiming they were misled by the HOA. But the city froze their applications. Civil suits began piling up from other communities where similar tactics had been used. Lillian called me a few days later. Your case is now part of a wider investigation, state level. You think they'll go to prison? That depends, she said. But they won't be touching property law again anytime soon. In the weeks that followed, the Seacliff Shores HOA was placed in receivership. A temporary administrator was assigned by the court, a retired judge named Harold Vance, who opened every meeting with a full reading of member rights and legal limitations. The mood in the neighborhood shifted. People stopped whispering and started asking questions. Minutes were published. Financial records were audited, and the gate, still there, still blue. But now, every time someone walked past, they nodded with something new in their eyes, not suspicion, not judgment, respect. One afternoon, while I was repainting a portion of the fence, a kid from down the street rode by on his bike and stopped. You're the guy who stopped the HOA, right? I paused. I just stopped them from stealing my beach. He squinted toward the ocean. Can we still use the public one? Always, I said. It's your right. He grinned and took off again, kicking up sand behind him. Later that evening, I got a letter in the mail, not from a lawyer, not from another board member, but from a neighbor I'd never met. It was handwritten, just one line. Thank you for protecting what's yours. You ended up protecting all of us. I folded it and slid it into a drawer, not out of sentiment, but because it reminded me of something simple people forget too easily. Property rights aren't just lines on a map. They're the last defense against the people who think their power matters more than your home. And in Seacliff Shores, that truth finally held the line. The wind had started turning colder by the time the first court date was scheduled. Not that I was counting. I'd spent the last 2 weeks coordinating with Andrea, sitting through interviews with investigators, and watching the neighborhood transform one cautious conversation at a time. But the real turning point came when I was called to testify before the grand jury. The courthouse was a squat gray building on the edge of downtown, the kind of place that hummed with quiet bureaucracy. Andrea met me on the steps, her briefcase already open, a stack of annotated files in hand. "They're not just going after Penelope anymore," she said. 3 other board members have been implicated. The DA's office is looking to establish a pattern of intentional misrepresentation, something they can use to justify freezing HOA funds permanently. I asked what that meant for the neighborhood. If they can prove misuse of funds or deliberate fraud, the HOA will be dissolved, not just suspended, gone. The board loses all authority and a court-appointed trustee sells off remaining assets to repay damages. Inside, the proceedings were closed to the public. I was sworn in. Asked to walk the jury through the timeline, not just the gate, but everything that followed, especially the developer connection and the forged documents. "What led you to believe the HOA president was acting beyond her authority?" one juror asked. "She hired construction equipment to alter a property she didn't own," I said. "She altered maps, ignored court warnings, and vandalized private property. That's not overreach, that's criminal." They asked about the community impact, whether I felt targeted, whether I feared retaliation. I answered honestly. This wasn't about one gate. It was about whether a small group of people could rewrite property law because they disliked being told no. If they'd succeeded, it wouldn't have stopped with me. After I stepped down, Andrea stayed behind to speak with the DA. I waited outside, watching a pair of pigeons fight over a discarded sandwich wrapper. When she emerged, her expression was unreadable. "They're moving forward," she said. "Indictments will be filed by the end of the week. And they're adding one more charge: conspiracy to commit commercial fraud." The reason, I learned later, was a paper trail recovered from the HOA's private server emails between Penelope and the developer that included promises to deliver uncontested access within 60 days. In exchange, she'd receive a one-time compensation of $75,000, disguised as a consulting retainer. She'd nearly sold out the neighborhood for a year's salary. The news broke fast. Local reporters descended on Seacliff Shores like vultures at a fireworks display. Cameras on tripods, vans parked along the cul-de-sac, microphones jabbed at anyone who opened their front door. I stayed inside mostly. Let the facts speak for themselves. But what no one expected, not Andrea, not the DA, not even the neighbors who had once backed her, was that Penelope would attempt a counterattack. 3 days before the trial, I received a hand-delivered letter. No return address. Inside was a single page, typed in bold print. "You have no idea what you've started. This isn't over." Andrea examined it. "It's not enough for a threat charge," she said, "but we document it. Every word." The next morning, someone tried to disable my security cameras. They didn't succeed. The motion sensors caught a figure in a hoodie approaching the pole camera by the dunes, holding what looked like a signal jammer. Before they could reach the casing, the floodlights kicked on and the siren blared. They ran, stumbling over the sand, disappearing into the night. But the footage was crystal clear. Andrea handed it over to Ramirez, who added it to the case file. This time, there was no ambiguity. They traced the hoodie back to Penelope's nephew, who had once served as an unofficial volunteer for the HOA's enforcement committee. He was arrested the next morning. That sealed it. By the time the trial opened, the courtroom was packed. Not just reporters, but neighbors, people who had once waved politely, unsure of where they stood. Now they filled the benches, arms crossed, eyes locked on the defense table. Penelope arrived in a dark pantsuit, her face pale beneath too much makeup. No sunglasses this time, just a stack of notes and a court-appointed attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The prosecution called witness after witness. A zoning official testified that the altered plat maps were not only forged, but printed on stolen city stock paper taken from an office Penelope visited regularly under the guise of community liaison. A former HOA treasurer took the stand and admitted that financial records had been falsified. "She told us it was temporary," he said, "just to make the books look cleaner for the audit." Even Glenn, the former treasurer who had tried to stay neutral, testified that Penelope had instructed him to destroy old meeting minutes that contradicted the new access policy. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. She weaponized her position to push a development agenda no one authorized. When that failed, she tried to ruin me personally for standing in the way. Her lawyer tried to question my motives, asked if I had ever attempted to profit off the beach, if I had exaggerated the threat. "I never charged a cent," I said. "And if you're looking for exaggeration, try the fake easements and the bulldozer she hired." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Penelope received 3 years in state prison with an additional 5 years probation. Her nephew got 6 months for attempted vandalism and obstruction. The developer quietly settled with the city, paying out over $2 million in penalties and withdrawing all coastal applications. As for the HOA, dissolved, a court-appointed trustee handled the final payouts. The leftover funds, what hadn't been siphoned into Penelope's consulting accounts, were distributed back to homeowners, pro-rated by dues paid over the last 5 years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something. The neighborhood voted to remain HOA-free, no new board, no new bylaws, just a loose civic committee for trash and snow removal. The gate stayed up. No one questioned it anymore. One afternoon, I was raking the sand near the fence when Judy approached. She was carrying a folded piece of paper and a small wooden plaque. "We had these made," she said. "Just a little thank you." The paper was a list of signatures residents who wanted to express support. The plaque read, "In defense of what's rightfully yours, you defended what's right for all of us." I didn't say much, just nodded and placed it next to the gate, mounted on a cedar post. That night I walked the beach alone. The wind had picked up again, colder now but clear. The surf rolled in steady waves. No ATV tracks, no fire pits, no trash bins pretending to be community improvements, just sand, sea, and silence. Peace earned the hard way and kept.